to introduce me. I'm David Kester, I'm Chief Executive of the Design Council. Welcome, thank you for coming. It's an intimate session. I believe that we're up against Alistair Campbell and Gus O'Donnell, so I think we're going to find it difficult to compete, but we have a very interesting session and also two fantastic speakers, contributors for you. Michael Bichard, who you may know as the Executive Director of the Institute for Government, and Ben Reason, one of our leading designers in the UK, but also a designer that runs a sort of different sort of design company to one that a number of us are often familiar with, and very relevant to our conversation today, and also the architect, as it were, leader of a project of a film that we're going to show you. Briefly, Design Council, we are the body that promotes design into industry, but also into the public sector. So we work with about 1,000 UK firms a year. And on to this session. And I was trying to think how to introduce this session today, and then I discovered that it was the third day of Civil Service Live, and not only the third day of Civil Service Live, but the afternoon of Civil Service Live. So I am aware that some of you may be lagging. Of course, this may be your first afternoon, you may have just dipped in, but I'm assuming that we're slightly in the tired zone. So I thought, rather than give you my lecture on design, I thought we might start with a bit, I'm seeing that you're getting worried here, but I'm going to start with a little bit of a warm-up exercise, just to sort of get us in the spirit and to make us think a little bit about the topic as well. And just to make that warm-up lively, I've got it as a sort of little quiz. So I've got some questions for you, and of course, as with good questions, I have prizes. I gather, Michael's just told me, much to my chagrin, that somebody else was handing out iPods. Yes. Well, I'm afraid I can't compete.
Teddy bears.
This is
teddy bear there. I want
teddy bears. Yeah. Teddy bears. Well, I can compete with teddy bears, but I can't compete with iPods, I'm afraid. But I have a really rather lovely 2 gigabyte memory card, which is a Design Council one. So there we are. So that's what you get. That's your prize. And I thought I'd start off with, let's start off easy, because this is a warm up both to warm you up, but also a warm up into design. So I thought we might start with, what do you think is a good example of design? I want to hear some good examples. I might ask you why. You can shout out, you can put your hand up maybe. iPod. iPod? Who said iPod back there? Why would you say is a good example of design? Okay. Sounds good. I think that is a good example of design. We might come on to, we might draw a few conclusions from this later, but I think that deserves one of these. There we are, a round of applause. The complete antithesis of this, so an example of bad design. Interesting. I mean, I don't think this. I see a camera on, which is quite an interesting thing when we're on me. But of course, Microsoft, Apple. The thing that made Apple famous, some of you may know, was that they actually invented the graphical user interface, which of course was the predecessor of Apple. But why would you say Microsoft Windows?
I suppose it could be good because I think it's sort of letting you do what you want to do, but painfully and slowly, so and you don't get away with any enjoyment.
Lack of enjoyment out of it. That's interesting. Anybody want to come up with any other examples of bad design? Sorry?
The Olympia Centre.
The Olympia. Well, there's an interesting one, isn't it? Because the setting that we're in creates quite an, Churchill actually said, first we shape our buildings and then they shape us, which is an interesting thing if you think about what this is doing for us today. Why would you say Olympia is a...
It's hugely people unfriendly.
People unfriendly. People unfriendly. That's... any other examples of bad design?
This battery device here, it has all the functions, but only, just not convenient to use.
complete, because I have one too, and they're miserable things, aren't they? They're actually counterintuitive on so many
Tax credits.
tax credits. Why would you say tax credits?
They don't fit with the way people live. People claim tax credits and then their situation changes and they end up in debt.
So okay, now pause there. And my last one, in fact, actually, that's quick. Who do we pick? Actually, quick show of hands, because we had Olympia, tax credits, and BlackBerry, and Microsoft Windows. Okay, so who goes for Microsoft Windows? Hands up. Microsoft Windows, bad design. One. Quite a lot. And if we go for BlackBerry, nah. So we count you out. And tax credits, quite a lot actually. That's sort of on a par. And then Olympia. Olympia wins it, I think. So who was Olympia? Over here. Oh no, you can't have it. We have to give it over here. There we are. Round of applause. My final one for you is how would you define design? Could somebody give me what they would give as a definition of design? And I am gonna follow this up. I'm gonna give you what I think are one or two examples of good and bad design before we kick off, and the definition too. But I'm sure you've got your own view of what is design. So anyone want to give me an idea? Ideas. Design is ideas. Design's ideas.
Your requirements well and easily.
Meeting requirements easily. Interesting ideas. We're getting a few things going here. Design. Anything else?
Not too complex, practical.
Practical, not complex, or simplicity. A process. Interesting. How something looks and feels. Okay, so there's the various bits here. I'm going to come back. I'm going to hold this back at the moment. We'll see whether I'm going to award this. I thought I might actually. There we are. I have got a screen. I thought I might just show you just a couple. Because we've talked about Apple iPods, and we've talked about Olympia, and we've talked about sort of some examples of good and bad design. And a lot of them have actually been. It's interesting because we've got a service in there with tax credits. A lot of them have been stuff as well, but I just thought I'd show you something from some work that we've done just recently with the NHS, given that we're sort of now move into public services, and that's sort of what we're talking about. So I thought I'd just move on and see whether this works. Oh, that's me. This is a project that we've just been running with the NHS, and what it's been looking at is a problem. So it started with a problem, not with we want something designed, but with £1 billion of taxpayers' money being spent on actually the negative outcomes of MRSA and C. difficile. And is there something that could be done about that? And actually a connection was made to the physical design of artefacts in hospitals, which is where C. difficile and MRSA and these nasty bugs and so forth can actually get passed on. And so we organised something where we actually enabled businesses and designers and so forth to come together, think about that, and develop solutions and ideas. And I just thought I'd show you a couple, because I thought they show, I think, some examples in a context. I mean, that's actually what a bedside, very familiar, a bedside environment looks like, which actually we discovered is a major problem for cleaners, keeping hospitals clean, hugely problematic. And here on the left is, I think I quite like from this photo because it actually says throw out thanks on it. But it's quite a good example in this context of bad design, because clearly from a functional point of view, if you've got something that's got lots of crevices and it wears badly and it's wood as well, it's not going to be easy to clean and it's going to pass on infections. And on the right you've got a really brilliantly, newly designed chair on this, actually on a fantastically on a price point for the NHS. But actually what you've got here is all of those little cushions are the same size. They all are easy to clean. They come off and they're actually magnetised on, as well as all of the armrests as well. They're just magnetised onto that shell. And the chair's comfortable. It's been built around the user. They've gone through really rigorous ergonomics and so forth. So quite a nice, maybe an example. You might disagree. But perhaps quite a nice example of some good design. It does leave us slightly in the space where we're talking about stuff, though. And I think if I want to leave you with a thought on the definition question and maybe an introduction to our first speaker, Sir Michael Bichard, it's two thoughts. And it sort of picks up on your point about ideas. But I'd suggest that there's a really good and useful textbook definition for us to consider, because I'm hoping we're all going to have a conversation about some of these projects. And one is that there's creativity, there's innovation, and there's design. And these definitions appear in, by the way, if anybody's interested, in a wonderful report that was written by Sir George Cox to the Treasury on the role of design and creativity in the economy. And he sort of put out at the front, because it's quite useful when you do those reports, to put your definitions out up front. And the one on creativity is the generation of ideas. And in a sense, that's what we all have, isn't it? And it's something we have in abundance. It's something to actually take advantage of in the nation. The second is innovation. And innovation is the commercial, textbook definition, the commercialization of ideas, particularly in technology. And design is the connection between the two. It's what actually turns ideas into successful products or services that are built around users. And if we're, my parting shot for you is design isn't actually the noun, it's the verb, it's the act. And somebody mentioned the process point. In fact, who mentioned the process point? So I think we're going to give you the final card, because although the chair that I showed is a thing, it's actually the design bit is the act of getting there. And sometimes, as we're going to discover today, design is invisible. That you don't actually see the design. It doesn't need to have the chair. Sometimes it's actually just using the processes. And Michael, I think, is going to talk a little bit about that. So that's my bit, hopefully a little bit of introduction. Michael's going to say a few words. We're going to see a film. We're going to have a chat. Thank you very much.
Right, so I'm going to be brief for several reasons, one of which is I know we're going to be evicted at 5 o'clock by the Olympian staff, so let's move on. These are really challenging times. You know that, I know that. Recession, banking failures, climate change, an ageing population, growth of chronic disease, and threats to national security. Some might argue that all of that adds up to a crisis. I think it probably does. But crises are really funny things. No one seeks them out. But they have a way of producing new ideas and new solutions to long-standing problems. And that happens because, although in a crisis some people panic, we've all been with them, some people freeze, and some just keep digging. Others realise that it's the time to take the initiative and do things differently but with a purpose. And I think that's the kind of choice which faces those of us who are working in the public sector right now. We can panic, we can freeze, we can keep digging in the way that we always have, or we can look for new ways of delivering better services at less cost. And if you're up for that, or if your department is up for that, then the good news is that design really can help you. But how? Well, of course, many people do still regard design as something to do with the aesthetic. They see it as something esoteric. They certainly see it as peripheral, all a bit arty and airy-fairy. But others are coming to understand rapidly that it can be much more than that, and that the skills, the tools, the disciplines used by designers could just open the door to better public services at less cost. And why do I say that? Well, I say that because, first of all, designers build products and services around clients so that the real needs of clients are met. They're good at not just involving clients, not just allowing clients to participate, but actually ensuring that those clients help shape the final outcome. And that isn't something which we in the public services have been brilliant at over the last 30 years. But designers do other things too. As someone said a moment ago, designers also simplify complex problems. Everyone loves the iPod. The guy who designed it, of course, was British, Jonathan Ives, and if you talk to Jonathan, he will describe the process of solving a whole series of complex problems and ending up with something that's also beautiful. But actually, for him, the great success was solving those complex technical problems, getting that technology into a small space in an accessible way. That's what designers do. They deliver solutions which are accessible and easy to use, otherwise no one uses them, no one buys them. Designers and service designers especially are also brilliant at creating a seamless experience for the client. They work across the organisational boundaries, and where necessary they join up the fragments to provide a coherent service when you look at it through the eyes of the client. And if we're honest, those of us working in the public services know that what we very often do at the moment is to provide fragments of services from our particular bureaucratic boxes. Designers can help us to counter that. Designers work in the future. They use various strategies to produce innovative solutions to problems that are sometimes still only imperfectly described for a future which is still uncertain. One of our great designers is a guy called Richard Seymour. He often makes this point. I'm actually working in 2015, he'll tell you if you speak to him. I'm designing cars for 2015. He was the guy who produced the first really mobile phone. Designers can help you, help public services to think into the future. And finally, designers are also pretty cost conscious because they need to produce affordable solutions that will be bought by customers, which are afforded by clients. So if you think about the future of public services, you'll see the value of designers. They are able to create simple, affordable, innovative, seamless and client-centered services. And you might even agree that we've wasted quite a lot of money in the past investing in complex, expensive and fragmented services, which I'm afraid have more to do with the convenience of the providers than they have with the convenience of clients. And that's what's got to change. And if that still seems a little bit conceptual, a little bit esoteric, then the work that we at the Design Council have been doing with the National Health Service around the BUGS project, the work we've been doing with the Home Office to design out crime, the work we're doing with a major water utility to design new programs for energy conservation, the work we're about to do with the National Health Service on patient experience. I mean, what's your experience when you go into the hospital? What's your experience when you take aged parents into hospital? Often a lack of dignity, great commitment, but a lack of dignity. And we're working with them to improve the whole patient experience, get rid of mixed-sex wards, produce more dignity for the patient. And yes, bring on other projects. I'd love us to have a chance to work with the MOJ, and I know they're sitting here, on the criminal justice system, which must be one of the worst designed systems still left in the public services. I'm sorry, it's not a criticism of you. I used to chair the Legal Services Commission. So we think design really can help, but don't take our word, don't take my word for it. Let's look at a really practical example of design in action. This one's set in Sunderland. Ben was very much involved in it, and I think we'll say one or two words when you've had a chance to see the film. And then, as David said, we'll have a conversation. Over to the film.
Sunderland has done extremely well over the last 10 or 15 years in regenerating its economy. And we've created a lot of new jobs in automotive and contact centres and financial services. But quite shockingly, we still have a very high number of people who are out of work. So the worklessness cohort is around 37,000 people. You know, it's a lot of people. And that is a mixture of JSA claimants and also people on incapacity benefit. So it's still a huge, significant problem for Sunderland.
I'm Louise Henderson and I'm a full-time carer for my son. He was diagnosed with autism. He has quite a severe form of autism and he has no speech. I used to work full-time, but after he was diagnosed and I had my daughter Holly, I became a full-time carer. I was just concentrating fully on caring. I really didn't have an immediate plan for the future, and then I bumped into a company called People in Employment. Yeah, after I met them, Jill Charman, who works for PI, came to do an interview at home. She went through the types of work that I might be interested in. I came up with being a teaching assistant because that would fit into my lifestyle, with working the hours and having the holidays off where I could still do all the caring for Nathan. And then it went from there. It's absolutely fabulous because if I hadn't met PI, I don't think I would have been back into work. And now I'm just looking forward to the future, and I've enrolled in another course related to autism, which I'm specifically interested in, and I'm just looking to the future, and I'm very ambitious about what the future holds.
I didn't even think the week after. I didn't even think the next day. I thought I was just living daily life. It was maybe the relationship I was in. I was trying to support my two kids, give them the best that they wanted, and obviously kind of doing the door. And I was making good money on committing crimes. So basically I was just thinking of my girlfriend, my ex-partner, and my two sons. But obviously going in and out of prison all the time, it was just breaking the relationships down. But I didn't realise at the time. I didn't know what was happening. I was just thinking I was keeping them happy by giving them money, and it wasn't like that. I just kept going. There was a job centre for months when we were in released, trying to get jobs, and I couldn't break a barrier because of my qualifications. So I basically put us through my reg truck licence. A week after that, gets me slip, my certificates. Didn't have my card, but I got my certificates. I went to the job centre. A week after I was in the job centre, I started employing. I've been there for a few weeks now. I'm really enjoying it. Changed my life around. All my family's been HGV drivers, so that's maybe one of my goals for next year, is always get Christmas out of the way and try and save a bit of money for my HGV licence. Because I've always wanted to have a HGV licence, but obviously with the site that I was in, I couldn't get the way I wanted to be. So that was just like a far-fetched dream sort of thing, really. But now it's not a far-fetched dream, it's true, it's actually in my grasp to reach it.
What made the Sunderland Make It Work project different is the focus on service design and the involvement of innovation and design expertise to support the review in such a traditional public sector activity, and that's what made it so interesting for One North East. The design-led approach really challenged the way we think about and work with the market, both clients and providers. We have a much more user-centred approach. Design expertise helped us understand the real, not perceived barriers and to design out practical solutions.
I think the positive features that we've been able to learn from this project has been very much to look at things through the eyes of the user, through the eyes of the client, and there were some key words that we've had drummed into us by the design team from the beginning, and that is we have to make the journey and the service be efficient and effective. But then, and they're terms that we're all quite familiar with, but then it has to be usable and useful and desirable. And I think it's really, that was a new one on us. We weren't used to working with things that had to be desirable, but people have to want to do it.
For me personally, I think it was the visual thing. I actually think being able to visualise in very simple terms the progression and being a bit of an old cynic, I was sort of thinking, yeah, well, let's see. But then I went to a presentation just a couple of months ago when the figures were actually getting quite substantial. And you could actually see the clusters of people very visually, and you could see the progression very visually. And I think it was stunning because it really showed you the achievement. And I think seeing it, I'm quite a verbal person and sort of anecdotal person, and being able just to actually visualize it was really, I thought was, I did actually find that quite stunning.
It was good because it was an interactive experience, that the groups felt involved, that they felt that they were genuinely being listened to, that people would value their opinion, and it also gave a feeling of optimism that there was a stream of funding that could be applied for.
I think the refreshing thing about the project and the most inspiring thing about the project has been how effectively a disparate group, a motley crew of different providers has actually come together and recognised the value that each of them has and what they can actually give to other people and give to the whole client journey.
What I thought we might do is, because lots of issues opened up, and we've got 20 minutes of opportunity for conversation. But I thought if I might direct the opener to Ben, we started our conversation with sort of what is design and is it the thing, and quite clearly here in this project, it wasn't the brand, and so. What's the bit that's designed, then, in that project?
That's a good question. The thing that is designed is an alliance between a number of different organisations working together for those people who needed to get back into work. Looking at it, I always try to sort of think, what did we actually do? But we did point out where the service and the systems were not aligning with the needs of the people of Sunderland that we met very early on in the project. So, the thing that we did was make sure that lady with the little boy was working with the Carers Association, who were best fit to help her and her needs, because they understood the best and they had the right, the right partnerships and the right connections to support her. And the same with the chap with the forklift truck who hadn't got anywhere with the job centre, but then doesn't say in the film, but ended up working with one of the very small sort of ex-user drug rehab teams who were part of the project. So it was about aligning people along a journey back to work with the right people at the right time.
But you had. I'm not a designer, but what struck me about the Sunderland project was you had something like 290 different organisations all offering a service to a workless person. Some of them were offering services to get them off of drugs so they could get to work. Some of them were offering housing services. Some were offering learning and skills services. And all of them, really committed. But if you were the kind of client, you look at this and it just looks a mess. And you don't know where to go, and you don't know how to join it up. And I think often with public services, we leave the client to do the joining up. I think what you did, what Make It Work does, is kind of make this a more seamless offering that they could understand.
And for our audience here, because I know it can be, you can struggle with saying, well, hang on a moment, where does management consultancy sort of begin and end, and where does design begin and end, and is there a difference? And do you think there's a way that you went about this as a designer, and somebody who actually calls themselves a service designer working on this project? What would you say you bring into the project that's different to, say, what Deloitte or Accenture or KPMG or somebody else might have brought in? I mean, what are the tools, what are the things that you do?
But there are definitely two very clear things that we do that when we have worked with management consultants, they don't do. Yeah. One is the first thing we did on the project was go out in the field and talk to service users and understand and articulate what their experiences were, and that was the first thing that informed the project, and that's the kind of common thread throughout the project. And we were always able to refer to those stories along the way and remind people who they were working for. Because Michael's point is spot on. What we did was make it easier for those people, not easier for Sunderland City Council. And the second thing is when we have an idea, we draw it and we visualise things, or we visualise the journey back to work and help people all see that they're working to that same plan. And we also visualise some of the things that people might use along the way, some of the artefacts of the service. There were very few here, but there were some things that everybody used. Like we redesigned what's it called, the form that they fill in, and the guidance worker works with them through to set goals and things like that. So everyone used the same way of working with people.
I'm gonna, lady over there. Is there a microphone or not? We're not doing microphones. We are? Yeah. There is?
Yep. Good try.
Let's go for that. So maybe you'd like to just say who you are.
Hello, my name is Hilary Norman and I work in the office of the Third Sector in the Cabinet Office. And what I'm hearing from you is very similar to what I hear often from Third Sector providers of public services who are working very much in local situations on the front line, delivering what they see as very personalised client-designed services. And the frustration they face often is how to connect their very much bottom-up approach that they sometimes fund through public sector finance and sometimes from a whole medley of other grants that they raise. How to connect that with the top-down commissioned process that comes from the public sector to mainstream what they're doing and to roll out what they see as a highly successful, if local, programme. And I'd be really interested in your ideas about how to bridge that gap and whether what you're doing could be connected to third sector provision that's also in their own way designing public services.
Absolutely, and in essence, at the heart of your question, if I'm right, is how do we connect what you might see as sort of frontline innovation, community-led innovation, with policy making. There's so much great innovation that happens at the front line. How does one often also turn that into mainstream innovation? Michael?
Well, I'm in danger of repeating myself to at least one person who was in the last session I did this afternoon, but I'm so pleased to see you back here. It's so reassuring. But
you have the fan club.
One of the points I was making there is that what we've seen often over the last 30 or 40 years in public services is a lot of consultation, a lot of involvement in participation exercises, but very few attempts to give real power to either communities or clients. And what I think this does, what someone like you does, and service design can do, is actually put the power back in the hands of the client, get them to shape the service. That's what a really good service designer does. He doesn't just chat to clients, he actually begins to build around their vision of the service. Now, that's what you're looking for. I think what we're saying, naked marketing for design here, is that there's still not many people in the public services who understand design or service design. There aren't many people who can provide this kind of support. And it just seems to us that it seems to me that what we've done very often in the last 12, 13 years is to invest a lot of money in badly designed services. And it's not surprising if you do that you don't get the transformation you expect. You get some improvement because you're throwing people at the problem, but you're not transforming the service in the way that, I know it's an old example, but in the way that First Direct did with the banking system, because they built it anew around the client at the time. That's what we want. We want more people to be asking for design support to do the sort of things you want.
Ben?
Yeah, I just want to say the one thing that's kind of hidden that we did design or redesign was procurement on the project. The way that Sunderland were procuring what are all third sector providers primarily on the project, and we involved 250 different organisations in that procurement process. It was the procurement process was actually an innovation workshop as far as I was concerned, but they were able to find out what was needed and then respond. So they weren't, one of the things I hate most is procurement, because you're throwing things over walls and hoping that they're what people want, but they, you know, that's what Michael, I think, is saying. So not just the end users, but those small, I mean, some of these were 4 people working in a small office. And
I mean, just to add to that, I think the point about the joining up bit with policy making, what we found is that the third sector can be so informative and important in the mix. What seems often the trick that's missed when doing the innovation exercise is often not involving policymakers and the third sector and the local communities at the same time. Because almost if you go off doing a pilot or something, it's too easy for something really excellent to happen at the front line and for it to be missed, and the dots don't get joined up. And actually in similar projects, in fact some that LiveWork have been involved in the northeast as well, we ended up working on Alzheimer's, on energy provision, on a range of different areas. But if it was Alzheimer's, it was with the Alzheimer's Society, and it was UK policymakers from the NHS. And that enabled actually some small innovations to then get mainstreamed into the National Alzheimer's strategy for the UK. And it's so important that we do that when we worked in London on energy provision with one small borough, it became actually part of the London climate change strategy. And got rolled out into a national service, a green concierge service. And the art there is exactly doing what you're saying, which is encouraging public sector leaders, when they have to lead on a transformation activity, to try to bring together the different sort of actors into what is ultimately some sort of safe innovation space. And maybe that's an area that we may want to talk a little bit about, which is how you drive that innovation and also how you procure it. But
we got 8 minutes.
We've got some time.
Brief questions.
Some questions.
Hang on.
Sorry, that was an interesting session earlier on about local employment partnerships, but it was also with the Cabinet Office. They were talking about socially excluded people and the disadvantaged in the community, and how the civil service jobs vacancies can be designed to suit needs of the people who actually need the work. And there's top 4 people like children coming out of care, thinking about the recruitment in the civil service and how we can bring people in with an apprenticeship and design the needs, like people with mental health issues, you know, bring them into the civil service with designing the jobs to meet that customer's needs. And I was saying about MenCap, you know, how they really help with people with mental health issues. You know, do we involve them? Are they working with us, you know, to get the right work for that kind of person?
I'm going to take one or two. I'm going to ask whether there are any sort of specific questions that we might actually get in. Gentleman over here.
One specific one about Sunderland. Was that Sunderland fits only as much as the national government, especially employment strategies, are specifically across the whole nation. So I was just wondering on that one, whether you think that would work in Newcastle, Liverpool?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, I don't totally understand when people say, you know, this is only works here, and why not? I know that the conditions are different in different places, and the existing provision will be different. But you know, we've worked with our approach in all sorts of different areas, and the last thing that we did with Sunderland was sort of define the model for how this works. And I'm very keen to talk to people. I've sort of been trying to, and I have talked to some people in the Cabinet Office who are doing the work that you're talking about around accessibility. You know.
But maybe it does open a question, Michael, about how we spread or diffuse our knowledge of innovation and also some of the outcomes as well.
Yeah, and the public sector has always had a problem with that, and ownership is important. I mean, you know, often parts of the public sector are quite reluctant to accept something which is going on elsewhere. I think we've just got to keep plugging away, and you know, the proof of the pudding, isn't it? I mean, Sunderland scheme is having some success. We've got to publicise that and hope other people will pick it up, but they won't pick it up exactly as it is in Sunderland. They have to, in a way, they have to go through a similar process so that the third sector in that area and others feel they're part of that solution. But it's not a long process, and this is not rocket science. That's what frustrates me sometimes. This is not rocket science, actually. It's just a disciplined approach to a problem which designers can bring.
Some other questions we've got to come. Yep, gentleman over here.
Jonathan Ryan, Community and Local Government. I'm interested in the implementation of this, whether it was really you put a front room in front of all these different, perhaps inefficient services, or you were able to reorganize the services behind that to gain efficiency as well as be more user-centric.
So your question is specifically on...
It's specifically on Sunderland. What did you do? Was it you looked at all the processes and thought, we can map these out and we can make it clearer for everyone how they should talk to each other. We can put in something that joins it all up. Or did you say, we can change how Sunderland works?
So in a way, how much was this vision and how much was it actually almost reprocess? Was it about the processes and the wiring and rewiring?
It's about the wiring. We rewired the way they worked together. Those organisations, they were all working there already. I mean, as Michael said earlier, it was, at one point it was described as an umbrella. It was a way to make sure that the right people were doing the work and there wasn't duplication and things like that. So.
What happens if you found one duplication? Were people happy to say, okay, I'll give the job to this lot and I'll stop doing the job?
Well, that's kind of happening, yeah. No, but it was... that wasn't, wasn't a problem once we started working this way. So, yeah.
But some of it's about access, isn't it? Some of it's about, the experience, and some of it's about outcome. And sometimes, as I understand it, what you manage to get in that middle section was some of these organisations working together in different ways and presenting that, branding it, if you like, in a way that people could understand better and access better. I think we've also done quite a lot of work in the private sector with small and medium-sized firms, 1,000 or so, using design as a route to innovation, getting them to rethink their strategy, deliver their service in different ways. And I mention that because it's not just things we talked about this afternoon that prove that this can work. It's been fantastic with some of those companies, and I think we can transfer that kind of approach into the public sector too. There's absolutely no reason why we can't put a designer alongside a health service, a PCT team, and get them to rethink how they go about delivering their service.
Gentleman back.
Thank you. Brian Hackland from Government Office Network, and perhaps joining up Michael's two sessions this afternoon. I was in a third session today where Richard Stay, who's the Deputy Leader of the new Central Beds Unitary, was speaking about LSPs, and he says they're a complete failure because people use them to defend their little bit of budget or their little bit of power, and they become a venue for competition, not for collaboration. Michael, you've just been saying now that design is not, I don't know whether you said it's not difficult, I'm sure it is difficult, but it's not complex. Good design, you start in the right place and you end up in a better place. But Sunderland was presumably about getting the 100+ organisations to work together and to commit to the design once you'd done the design. So the question, sorry, to get to the question, is how do you get the organisational context in which, when you do good design, you can implement it. Otherwise, there's no point. An iPod, which you haven't got somebody to sell, is beautiful but unfunctional.
We'll finish off here with, I'll give a little quickie, and maybe Ben as well, on the specifics of Sunderland. But if I give an example of where when we're working on major problems, and design starts, we're talking a lot about design is problem solving fundamentally. That's really, it's the art of finding simple solutions to complex problems. And the starting point must be always about doing design-led research. And it's a very tricky one, this, often for the public sector. Private sector seems to have got the hang of it, particularly on the consumer side. But it's really about understanding people's behaviours and trying to get onto latent needs and desires. And usually that doesn't come from market research. So design-led research often goes around and just literally photographs people, films people, uses ethnographers in the mix as well, and begins to paint a picture of what the real needs and latent desires are, and forms a picture then of where the context is. And that then frames what ultimately is your sort of design brief. And I don't know whether that conforms. I know that's something that you guys do a lot at LiveWork on many of your projects. I don't know whether it was the case in this particular story or not, whether you did, you know, design-led research on the project.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we started, but I'm not sure if that answers your question. I'm not sure if I understand the context with LSPs, because in some ways the LSP seemed helpful because they were now, you know, these people were under a banner and they were also looking at, you know, outcomes that they collectively owned around net jobs in Sunderland, so that seems a benefit. Maybe Michael can talk more about that.
Yeah. The difference is whether or not you look at it through the eyes of the client, whether you really focus on the client. A lot of LSPs, a lot of partnerships in the past have really been about getting the providers to work more conveniently together, not necessarily, I think, for the benefit of the clients. I think when you look at things through the eye of clients, whether you're in the public sector or the private sector, you see very clearly that some of these strange bureaucratic boundaries are very strange. They actually don't deliver what the client wants. The trick is to get people to look at things through the eye of the client. You can't force that. I mean, if they don't want to do it, they won't do it. In the private sector, if Jonathan Ives doesn't give the client what they want, they don't buy it and he gets sacked. In the public sector, it's a bit more subtle than that, but it oughtn't to be. We should still be trying always to look at it from the point of view of the client.
Yeah. There was just one thing that we found along the way, that there was an example of that, is that the main reward in this system from a provider point of view is getting someone a job, and then you get a tick, and that's what you're paid to do if you're in the employment space. But there were people working, you know, say with people with mental health, or at early stage of the journey back to work, who didn't, you know, would do a lot to engage people and get them ready to develop, you know, to go into training and go into work. But they never promoted them and got them that recruitment tick. And we did design a kind of way of monitoring the service so that there were assists along the journey, so that team that were specialists at dealing with people and getting them well enough to think about work actually got credit for their part in that. So we sort of, I guess we design new ways to get around some of those barriers that are there within the provider side as well as with users.
It's a taster, isn't it? And it's been an opener of a conversation. It's been a delight being together. I hope actually we've intrigued you a little bit on where design might fit in to service development, and particularly sort of transformation and innovation in our public services.
And if we have, come back.
Come back,
and
come and talk
to us. We'd love to redesign the criminal justice system.
And thank you very much. Just a little round of applause, if I may, for Ben. Thank you very much. And Michael as well. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you too.